I remember the night my marriage ended even though no one said the words. I stood in my bedroom, barefoot on cold marble, holding my phone like it was burning my skin. I whispered, "Are you coming to bed?" I heard nothing. I walked toward the bathroom and knocked once. "I'm tired." Silence answered. I leaned my forehead against the door and said softly, "I miss you." The door opened slowly. I saw his face, calm, distant, careful. He said, "Go sleep." That was all. No name. No warmth. No look that said I mattered. I nodded and stepped back. I lay in my bed alone while the other side stayed untouched, cold, perfect, empty. I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "When did I become invisible?" The ring on my finger felt heavy. I turned it slowly and said to myself, "You promised me forever." No answer came. The clock ticked louder than my heart. I heard him walk past the door without looking inside. I closed my eyes and pretended sleep. Minutes later he entered the room. I felt the mattress dip. I waited. I waited for a hand. I waited for breath near my neck. I waited for anything. Nothing came. I finally said, "Did I do something wrong?" He sighed. He said, "Please don't start." I turned toward him. "Start what?" He said, "This conversation." I whispered, "We don't have any conversations anymore." He stayed quiet. I said, "When was the last time you touched me?" He shifted away. I asked again, softer, "When?" He said, "I'm tired." I nodded. I always nodded. I stared at the ceiling again and felt tears crawl toward my ears. I said, "I feel lonely beside you." He said, "You're overthinking." I said, "I feel unwanted." He said, "You're sensitive." I closed my mouth. I pressed my lips together so hard they hurt. I thought, sensitive. Always sensitive. Never important. I reached for his hand slowly. He moved it away. Not angry. Just absent. That hurt more. I whispered, "Do you still love me?" The room held its breath. He said nothing. I asked again, "Please answer me." He said, "I don't want to talk right now." I turned my face toward the wall. I told myself not to cry. I failed. My tears soaked the pillow quietly. I thought of our wedding day. I remembered his smile. I remembered his hands shaking when he held mine. I remembered believing love could protect me forever. I whispered, "What happened to us?" No answer. I lay there for hours, counting every breath, every second, every memory that felt like a lie now. Near midnight, I heard his phone vibrate. Once, twice, 3 times. I turned slowly. The screen glowed. A name I did not recognize flashed across it. I watched it disappear. My chest tightened. Another message arrived. Then another. I said softly, "Who is that?" He grabbed the phone quickly. Too quickly. He said, "Work?" I nodded. I always nodded. I said, "It's midnight." He said, "Deadlines." I nodded again. My fingers trembled. I asked, "Can I see?" He sat up. He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm your wife." He said, "You don't trust me?" I whispered, "I'm trying to." He stared at me long and sharp. He said, "You're imagining things." I swallowed. I said, "I just feel like I'm losing you." He said, "You're dramatic." That word cut deeper than any truth. I said, "I still love you." He said nothing. He turned away. That was the moment. Not the messages. Not the silence. Not the distance. That simple turn of his back. That was when I knew. My marriage did not need a divorce to die. It died right there, between 2 pillows, between 2 strangers, between 2 hearts that no longer spoke. I removed my ring slowly. I placed it on the bedside table. I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. I whispered, "I tried." My voice sounded small. I stood and walked into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I asked, "When did you stop being enough?" My eyes were tired. My face was pale. My smile was gone. I touched my cheek and said, "You deserve love." I did not believe it yet. I washed my face and dried it carefully. I returned to bed. I lay beside him again. Still untouched. Still unseen. I whispered, "Good night." He did not answer. I closed my eyes. Inside my chest something cracked. Not loudly. Not completely. Just enough to change everything. That night I did not leave. I did not scream. I did not confront. I only made a quiet promise. I said inside my heart, I will survive this. I said I will not beg for love again. I said I will find myself even if I lose this marriage. I turned toward the window. Moonlight touched my hands. I noticed how empty they felt. I pressed them to my chest and whispered, "Stay alive, heart." My tears finally stopped. Not because pain ended, because numbness arrived. And somewhere deep inside that silence, a small seed began to grow. The seed of change. The seed of strength. The seed of a woman who would one day stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing herself. That was the night my marriage died. Without noise. Without goodbye. Without anyone noticing. Except me. I learned to measure time by what never happened. I woke each morning before him and whispered, "Good morning." Sometimes he answered. Most times he did not. I brushed my teeth beside him and said, "You're leaving early again?" He said, "Busy day. Always busy. Always distant." I tied his tie once and asked, "Do I still look beautiful to you?" He smiled without eyes. "You look fine." Fine. Not loved. Not wanted. Just fine. At breakfast I said, "We should go somewhere together." He said, "Next month." Next month never came. At night I said, "Can we talk?" He said, "I'm tired." Every night he was tired. Every night I stayed awake. One evening I placed my hand on his arm and said, "I miss us." He removed my hand gently and said, "We're fine." I nodded. I always nodded. I told myself silence meant peace. I lied. At a dinner party someone asked, "How long have you been married?" I smiled. 5 years. She said, "You look lucky." I laughed softly. Lucky. I went home and stared at my reflection. I asked, when did I become decoration? I stopped buying dresses. I stopped wearing perfume. I stopped trying. One morning I said, "Did I upset you somehow?" He said, "No." I said, "Then why won't you touch me?" He looked at me like I asked something rude. He said, "Why are you obsessed with this?" I whispered, "Because I'm your wife." He said, "You're dramatic again." I swallowed words like glass. At family dinners his mother asked, "When will we hear good news?" I smiled and said, "Soon." Another lie. In the car I said, "They expect a child." He said, "We're not ready." I said, "We're never together." He said, "Lower your voice." That night I cried in the shower. Quietly. Always quietly. One afternoon I found a photo in his drawer. Not of me. A woman smiling. Young. Confident. I held it and whispered, "Who are you?" At dinner I said, "I found a picture." He froze. He said, "Old memory." I said, "Why keep it?" He said, "Don't start again." I placed the photo between us. I said, "Am I still your wife?" He pushed the photo away. He said, "You're imagining problems." I said, "I'm lonely." He stood up. He said, "You complain too much." The door closed. I sat alone with cold food and colder answers. That night I removed my ring. I placed it in the drawer. I said, "Rest. You're useless now." Months passed. Then years. Silence became routine. Distance became habit. I learned his schedule better than his heart. I asked fewer questions. I spoke softer. I disappeared slowly. One evening I said, "Do you remember our anniversary?" He frowned. "Is it today?" I nodded. He said, "I'll be late." I smiled. I ate cake alone. I blew the candle myself. I wished for courage. At midnight he arrived and said, "Happy anniversary." He placed a box on the table. Inside was a watch. Not my style. Not my taste. I said, "Thank you." He kissed my forehead. Not my lips. Never my lips. I whispered, "Stay with me tonight." He said, "I have work early." He left the room. I stared at the watch. I whispered, "Even time doesn't belong to me." One winter night I said, "Are you seeing someone else?" He laughed. He said, "You've lost your mind." I said, "Then why do you avoid me?" He said, "You're insecure." I nodded again. Always insecure. Never betrayed. That word stayed hidden. I found it later. At a charity event a woman approached me. She smiled too warmly. She said, "You're very lucky." I said, "Why?" She said, "He speaks highly of you." I asked, "Where do you know him from?" She paused. She said, "Business." Her eyes lied. That night I said, "Who was that woman?" He said, "Client." I said, "She knows too much about us." He said, "You're paranoid." I closed my mouth. I stopped asking. I stopped hoping. I survived. Years passed like shadows. No hands. No kisses. No warmth. Only silence between two expensive pillows. One morning I said, "I'm thinking of working again." He said, Why? I said, I feel empty. He said, do what you want. Permission felt like freedom. I took courses. I read books. I walked alone. I grew quietly. One evening I said, I feel stronger lately. He said, good. No pride. No interest. Just good. I realized something that night. He did not hate me. He simply did not need me. That truth hurt more than betrayal. 5 years. No touch. No love. No fight. Just absence. One night I stood in front of the mirror and said, if you leave, will anyone notice? The answer frightened me. I placed my ring back on my finger. Not for him. For myself. I whispered, you are still married to your dignity. Late one evening his phone rang. He answered quickly. He whispered, I'll come later. I asked, where are you going? He said, meeting. I said, at midnight? He said, important client. He left. I followed him to the door. I said, do you still belong to me? He paused. Just a second. Too long. He said, go sleep. The door closed. I stood there shaking. I said aloud, 5 years. 5 years of waiting. 5 years of silence. 5 years of pretending I was loved. I sat on the floor and hugged my knees. I whispered, how much longer? No answer. Only the clock. Only the ring. Only the silence that kept growing. I did not know betrayal was already living inside my house. I did not know truth was counting nights beside me. I only knew this. I was disappearing. And somewhere beyond this quiet suffering, change was already walking toward me. Slow. Patient. Unstoppable. I discovered the truth by accident, not courage. I was sorting his briefcase for papers he asked me to file. I saw a notification pop up on his phone. I froze. A message from a name I did not know. I swiped to read. My chest tightened. My hands shook. I whispered, it can't be. Another message appeared. More words. Words meant for someone else. I said aloud, how long? He didn't hear me. I kept reading. Every sentence was a knife. Every smile he sent her in words burned across my skin. I backed away shaking. I whispered, all this time? My phone buzzed. I ignored it. I wanted silence, not distraction. I stared at the floor, feeling air leave my lungs. I called his name softly. No answer. I walked toward him. He was in the study typing. I held the phone, voice trembling. Who is she? He didn't look up. I said, answer me. He stopped typing. I'm busy. I shook my head. Stop. Stop lying. He said, I'm not lying. I threw the phone on the table. It slid across, landing near his papers. I said, don't pretend you don't know what this is. He looked up, eyes calm. It's work. I laughed, but it was hollow. Work? Sending texts at midnight, laughing at jokes I never hear, calling her beautiful? He swallowed. It's nothing. I stepped closer. Nothing? He said, stop overreacting. I grabbed the table. I'm not overreacting. I'm your wife. I see your truth. He looked at me slowly. You shouldn't read my messages. I said, I don't need to read them to feel it. I felt it for years. He turned back to his papers. You're imagining things again. I whispered, am I? He didn't answer. I took a deep breath. Tell me you love me. He said, I do in my way. I shook my head. Your way is silence, absence, and lies. He stood. I don't know what you want from me. I said, I want the man I married. The one I trusted. He said nothing. I felt my knees weaken. I whispered, have you forgotten who I am? He said, no. Things change. I clenched my fist. Chains? Betrayal has a name and absence has a reason. He raised his voice slightly. I'm not betraying you. I said, then why can't you see me? Why does she exist instead of us? He paused. Stop yelling. I whispered, I'm not yelling. I'm awake. I've been awake for 5 years while you sleep beside me with someone else in your heart. The silence hit harder than anger. I turned and walked out of the study. My legs were unsteady, but my face was calm. He called my name. Wait. I didn't stop. I walked to the bedroom. I said, I don't need your excuses. I need truth. You've given me lies for years. He followed slowly. I shook my head. No. Not tonight. I sat on the edge of the bed. I picked up my ring and twisted it slowly. I whispered, I won't beg anymore. He sat beside me. Please don't leave me. I said softly, you left me a long time ago. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. He whispered, I didn't mean for this. I said, it doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you did. He looked down. I said, I loved you. I still do. But I won't let pain own my future. He said nothing. I felt a strange weight lift. I realized silence could be power. I whispered, I'll survive this. I'll heal. He asked, do you forgive me? I shook my head slowly. I said, not yet. Maybe never. But I'll live. He said nothing. I stood and walked toward the window. Moonlight touched my hands, cold but steady. I said aloud, this is the last time I'll feel powerless in this house. The night held its breath. I clenched my fist. I whispered, I am choosing myself. And for the first time in years I felt fire grow in my chest. The fire that would not be ignored. The fire that would not die. That night, betrayal had a name. And so did my promise I would rise. I broke alone in ways no one could notice. I cried in the bathroom, letting tears fall until the mirror fogged. I whispered, who am I anymore? No answer. I sat in my car after work and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I said aloud, I'm so tired. Empty streets reflected my face. I whispered, I'm not enough. I remembered the dreams I once carried. I remembered laughter, hope, and plans we made together. I said, where did it all go? At home I locked myself in the bedroom. I whispered, I can't do this anymore. My hands shook as I unfastened my necklace. I asked aloud, do you even see me? He didn't answer. No one did. I cried in the hallways, soft sobs no one would hear. I whispered, I'm invisible. At night I curled up on the couch. I whispered to the empty room, I need someone to notice me. I need someone to care. No one came. I felt weak yet stubborn. I refused to beg for affection again. I whispered, I will not cry for you anymore. I sat by the window, staring at moonlight touching empty streets. I whispered, I will survive this. The next day I put on a smile. At breakfast he said, you're quiet. I smiled. Just thinking. He nodded and left. I trained myself to stop expecting kindness. I whispered, I don't need you to love me. I practiced smiles that felt hollow but necessary. I told my reflection, you can do this. I worked longer hours, distracted myself with tasks no one noticed. I whispered, I am enough. One evening I found an old photo of us, laughing, happy. I traced it with a finger. I whispered, was that really me? I set the photo aside. I said aloud, I will not chase what left me behind. At dinner he asked, are you upset? I said, no, I'm fine. He nodded. I was fine. Fine was my armor. At night I walked alone in the garden. I whispered, I have to stand again. I noticed the flowers blooming despite frost. I said, if they can survive, so can I. I began small. Dresses I liked, meals I enjoyed, walks I chose. I whispered, I am learning to live, not just exist. I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I said, I need someone to see me. She laughed softly. You've always been here, just hiding. I whispered, I'm ready to stop hiding. I practiced speaking firmly when he asked questions. I whispered, I will not apologize for my feelings anymore. I cleaned the house meticulously, not for him, but for me. I whispered, I deserve beauty around me. One night he entered the room. He said, you're different. I smiled faintly. I'd been waiting to notice myself. He paused. You've changed. I whispered, I'm surviving. He said nothing. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I whispered, I am stronger than you ever knew. I began imagining a life beyond pain. I saw myself traveling, laughing, speaking freely. I whispered, I will find joy again. I remembered the ring on my finger. I touched it softly. I don't need your love to keep this promise to myself. I trained my heart to be loyal to me. I whispered, I am my own safe place. Days passed like careful steps. I no longer waited for warmth or praise. I whispered, I am enough. I sat by the window at night. He said, you've grown cold. I smiled. I've grown wise. I whispered inside, I will not let tears define me. The air in the house felt different. I walked with purpose, small but steady. I whispered, I will rebuild myself piece by piece. And in the silence no one saw, I promised my heart would never depend on him again. I would survive. I would rise. I would live. And that night, alone in the quiet, I began to believe it. I made a choice without anyone noticing. I whispered to myself, enough waiting. Enough silence. He asked one morning, "You're leaving early again?" I smiled softly. "I have errands." He didn't ask where. Good. I started small. I woke before dawn. I ran while the city slept. I whispered, one step at a time. One evening he said, "You look different." I said, "I feel different." He paused. "Different how?" I smiled faintly. "Stronger." No questions asked. I studied in secret, reading books I'd left untouched. I whispered, "Knowledge is power." I trained my body in quiet gyms. I lifted weights heavier than my fear. I whispered, "I will not break again." He asked once, "Are you doing this because of me?" I said, "No. I'm doing it for me." He frowned. "It feels cold?" I smiled. "It's warm inside." I saved money, counted every coin, every bill. I whispered, "Freedom is a plan." I ate better, slept earlier, rested when tired. I whispered, "I deserve care." I confronted fear silently, walking streets alone at night. I whispered, "I will not let fear win." He tried one evening. "Why are you changing?" I said, "Because I was lost and now I am found." He studied me. "Found where?" I shrugged softly. "Inside myself." I allowed anger to become fuel, not poison. I whispered, "Let it push me, not consume me." I avoided gossip, avoided pity, avoided reminders of weakness. I whispered, "Silence is my shield." One day I smiled at an old friend. She asked, "You've changed. Are you okay?" I said, "Better than okay." She tilted her head. "What happened?" I whispered, "I stopped waiting for permission. I built confidence in shadows. I walked taller, spoke louder, laughed softly but fully." I whispered, "I am becoming someone unstoppable." He commented once, "You're too focused on yourself now." I said calmly, "I finally am." I prepared for a life beyond him. I studied investments quietly. I read contracts, laws, and plans. I whispered, "I will not be powerless again." I learned to love myself. I touched my reflection in the mirror. I whispered, "You are enough." I avoided revenge. I told myself, "Revenge is empty. Freedom is full." I carried my heart carefully, like a fragile treasure. He asked one night, "Are you angry?" I said softly, "No. I am awake." I watched my reflection as moonlight touched my hands. I whispered, "Strength grows in silence." I practiced patience, waiting for no one. I learned how to stand without needing approval. He said quietly, "I don't know you anymore." I smiled faintly. "You never really knew me." I whispered, "And that's okay." I rebuilt my mind, my body, my pride. I lifted weights heavier than regrets. I studied lessons sharper than betrayal. I whispered, "I will rise above." I trained discipline in the early hours. I trained patience in empty rooms. I trained courage in cold streets. He noticed once, "You've changed. Too fast." I whispered, "I've been preparing for years." I allowed no one to see the cracks I still felt. I whispered, "They don't need to know." I plotted nothing for him. I plotted everything for myself. I said aloud in the mirror, "I choose me." He asked one evening, "Are you still the woman I married?" I said softly, "I'm better. And I will never be lost again." I learned that the quietest decisions are the strongest. I whispered, "I am ready for what's next." And somewhere in the distance, fate was already watching my every step. The woman who survived silence was finally preparing to rise. The woman who had been broken was quietly becoming unstoppable. I changed without anyone noticing. He commented one morning, "You're different." I smiled softly. "I've been learning." He frowned. "Learning what?" I said, "How to stand on my own." He paused. "Alone?" I nodded. "Alone but not lonely." I gained strength quietly. I walked into rooms with calm, shoulders straight, chin high. I whispered to myself, "Power is in how you carry yourself." One day, a mentor approached me at a seminar. She said, "I see potential." I smiled. "I've been waiting to realize it." She studied me. "You've changed." I said softly, "I had to." I met rivals too. They smiled politely, underestimating me. I whispered, "Let them think that." I spoke in meetings with confidence I had never dared before. He asked one night, "Are you working so much because of me?" I laughed softly. "No. I work for me. I work for the woman I'm becoming." He studied me quietly. "I don't recognize you." I said, "That's the point." I earned respect without revealing pain. I smiled at colleagues who once dismissed me. They nodded, impressed by work, not knowing how I had fought silently. I carried grace where shame once lived. I touched the necklace he gave me years ago. I whispered, "You can't define me anymore." One evening, a rival asked, "Why are you so calm?" I said, "Because chaos doesn't scare me anymore." I walked taller, laughed softer but fully. I whispered, "Confidence comes from surviving silence." I met mirrors, people who reflected my worth. I listened to their advice, adapted, grew. I whispered, "I am more than what I lost." He noticed subtle shifts. "You smile too easily now," he said. I smiled faintly. "I'm not waiting for permission to be happy." I learned elegance in small acts. I dressed for myself, not him. I walked through hallways holding my head high. I whispered, "I am unbreakable." I built an identity beyond marriage and name. I introduced myself at events without his shadow. People said, "You're inspiring." I said softly, "I'm surviving." I no longer measured worth through his attention. I whispered, "I am enough on my own." I began mentoring others quietly. They asked, "How do you stay so composed?" I said, "Because I built my calm on storms no one saw." He tried one evening. "Why do you command attention now?" I smiled faintly. "Because I stopped hiding." I felt proud for the first time in years. Not for him. Not for anyone. For me. I did not seek revenge, applause, or admiration. I whispered, "I am my own reward." Destiny, however, noticed. One evening, a message arrived at my office. It was from someone I hadn't expected. I paused. I whispered, "Change always brings a reckoning." The woman I had become was ready. Strong. Confident. Elegant. Unbreakable. And the world was about to take notice. I noticed changes before anyone spoke. At a gala, someone whispered my name. I turned. The look in his eyes caught me off guard. Curiosity, hesitation, regret. I said softly, "Do you need something?" He shook his head. "No. I smiled faintly. "Just what?" He looked away. I realized he was measuring me now. Not as a wife. Not as a possession. But as someone he had underestimated. At a meeting, a rival approached. "You've become formidable," she said. I nodded politely. "I've had practice." She raised an eyebrow. "Practice?" I smiled faintly. Life teaches lessons quietly. I could feel tension in familiar rooms. Staff who once ignored me now offered polite bows. He noticed too. "You're commanding attention," he said one morning. I replied softly, "I've always deserved it." He said nothing after that. I met mirrors, people who reflected my growth. They tested my patience, my pride, my limits. I faced each challenge without trembling. One mentor said, "You've changed. Are you aware of your power?" I smiled. Power is quiet. It waits. I walked past reminders of old pain. A photo on a desk caught my eye. I picked it up. It was us years ago, laughing. I whispered, "We were naive then." I placed it down carefully. I refused to let nostalgia weaken me. He tried to interrupt once. "You're cold?" I smiled faintly. I've learned warmth can be chosen, not given. I felt the shift. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just subtle. Eyes lingered. Words were chosen more carefully around me. I whispered, "This is karma, arriving softly." One evening, an enabler tried to corner me. "You've changed. Too much," she said. I replied, "I've learned to grow quietly." She stared, uncertain. I realized silence was my armor. I no longer needed to prove strength. It showed itself. He finally spoke after months of avoidance. "You're different," he said. I said calmly, "I'm awake now. You should notice." He said nothing else. I watched regret grow without confession. I allowed fate to move, letting it unfold without my interference. I did not chase closure. I did not demand explanations. I waited without waiting. One evening, I stood in the corridor of the office, listening. I overheard whispers, "She's unrecognizable, powerful, confident." I smiled softly. Karma didn't shout. It whispered. And those who ignored me before were beginning to hear it. I walked through the room with quiet pride. He looked at me across the space. Our eyes met. I did not speak. I only let silence do the talking. I could feel the power shift toward me, subtle, unstoppable. A mirror of my own strength reflected back at me in his gaze. I whispered to myself, "Let them watch. Let them realize." I did not hurry. I did not boast. I only moved forward. And in the quiet of that night I knew, karma had begun. Softly. Patiently. Inevitably. I heard his voice and froze. Can we talk? I turned slowly. There he stood, tall, polished, dressed in wealth, his eyes lined with something new. Regret. I said nothing. He said, I was wrong. I see it now. I listened. Without interrupting. Without softening. I felt his apology brush my ears but not my heart. I whispered to myself, it's too late. He took a careful step closer. I missed you. I raised a hand. No, I said softly. He paused. I studied him. The man who left me in silence, who betrayed me quietly for years, now stood asking for mercy. I whispered, you will not get it easily. I've changed, he said, voice desperate. I know, I replied. I see it. But I can fix us, he said. I shook my head slowly. Fix us? I repeated. Do you even understand what you broke? He swallowed. I want to make it right, he said. I stepped back. Right doesn't exist for what you did, I said. He faltered. I waited. I suffered. I survived. I became someone you never valued. He lowered his gaze. I don't ask for forgiveness, I continued. I don't need promises. I need respect. And respect, I demand, comes from action, not words. He swallowed again. I understand, he whispered. I studied him quietly, letting the weight of years and betrayal hang between us. He said, I was blind. I replied, and now you see me. He looked up, hopeful. I said, I am not yours to reclaim. He faltered, and for the first time, I noticed humility replacing his pride. He began. Stop, I said firmly. I stepped forward, chest straight, shoulders back. I am not here for your comfort. I am not here for your redemption. I am here for me. He nodded, swallowing hard. I can never undo what I did, he whispered. I said softly, nor can I forget. But I can choose what I do with the rest of my life. He opened his mouth again and I said, no more words. Your remorse exists for you, not for me. He looked away, a shadow of defeat passing over him. I felt something shift inside me. Years of silence, of waiting, of being unseen, it all funneled into one clear thought. Power belongs to me now. He stepped closer again, hesitating. I still love you, he said. I smiled faintly, calm but unyielding. I know, I said. But love, I whispered, doesn't erase betrayal. He nodded, finally understanding. I let him stay in the room for a moment, watching, humbled, unsure. I remained distant. I remained strong. I did not rush my healing. I did not reopen old wounds. I allowed his remorse to exist without reward. I studied him quietly, letting the weight of our past teach him humility. He finally turned to leave. I whispered to the empty space he vacated, this is mine. My house. My heart. My life. I pressed my hand to the table. I felt power, steady and unshakable, fill me. The woman who once waited in silence now ruled her own story. And he, for the first time in years, had no control over it. I exhaled slowly. The attempt to reclaim me had failed. And in that failure I felt triumph. Not over him. Over the girl I used to be. The one who begged for love. The one who suffered quietly. The one who existed in shadows. She was gone. I was here. Whole. Unshakable. And free. I stepped into the room and felt eyes fall on me. Not the polite glance of acknowledgement. No. This was curiosity, surprise, and, in some, disbelief. I walked tall, shoulders back, chin lifted. He noticed immediately. Who is she? I heard a whisper. I smiled faintly. I didn't answer. I claimed space in the boardroom with calm, unspoken authority. One of the senior partners said, I didn't expect. I interrupted softly, expectations change when people do. Heads turned. Whispers spread like fire. He sat across from me, silent, mouth slightly open. I felt pride bloom in my chest. I presented ideas with precision. I revealed results with confidence. I did not boast. I did not scream. I let numbers, strategy, and calm execution speak louder than words. A rival approached me after the meeting. You've changed, she said carefully. I said, I've learned. That's different from change. She nodded slowly, thoughtful. I felt respect grow where pity once lived. He asked quietly, How did you become this? I smiled faintly. Silence teaches more than anger ever will. I allowed him to witness it without interference. I let my presence communicate what words could not. Colleagues who ignored me before now asked for guidance. I whispered to myself, power does not need to be announced. I walked into the hallway later. Someone murmured, she owns herself. I smiled faintly. I did not need them to speak it. I knew it. The room that once minimized me now watched my every move. He stood silently behind me for a moment. I said softly, do you see? He did. I didn't need to explain further. I let silence hold the weight of years, betrayals, and neglect. I realized my survival had become victory. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Victory in dignity, strength, and recognition. I spoke with calm confidence. I will lead this project, I said firmly. Everyone nodded. I felt respect replace doubt. One colleague whispered, she's unstoppable. I walked past him. He looked at me and said quietly, you were always capable. I smiled faintly. You just never noticed. I felt the warmth of pride in my chest. I understood now that pain had shaped strength. That absence had forged patience. That betrayal had built resilience. I did not glare. I did not shout. I merely existed as proof. Proof that I could survive. Proof that I could thrive. Proof that the girl who once waited silently had become a woman in full control. I looked out the window. Light fell on my face, soft but unwavering. I whispered to myself, this is only the beginning. I prepared for the final truth between love and choice. Between the past and the future. Between what I had lost and what I had claimed. And I knew deep inside that no one could take this power from me. Not him. Not rivals. Not the world. I was no longer defined by absence, betrayal, or silence. I was defined by me. And for the first time the world had no choice but to see it. He stood across from me, eyes heavy with years I no longer counted. He began, voice low, hesitant. I listened. Not with hope. Not with anger. Only with presence. I lost you, he said quietly. I let the words fall. They trembled through the air, unearned, uninvited. I betrayed you, he continued. I nodded once, slowly. I whispered, yes, you did. His hands shook as he reached for mine. I did not move. I was blind, he said. I know, I replied. I can't take back what I did, he admitted, voice breaking. I never expected you to, I said softly. He looked at me, eyes glistening. I want to say sorry. I want you to forgive me. I studied him. I could feel the weight of years between us, every absence, every lie. I forgive you, I said finally. His shoulders slumped. Relief? Guilt? I could not tell. But, I continued, voice steady, forgiveness does not mean return. He swallowed. I let silence stretch between us. I see your regret, I said. I feel it. But it changes nothing for us. He tried to speak, but I raised a hand. Let me finish, I whispered. I do not reject your words, I said. I honor them. But my life is not yours to reclaim. His eyes softened, a mix of sorrow and recognition. I touched the necklace he once gave me. This, I said, was a symbol. But I am no longer defined by what it meant to us. He looked down. I understand, he said quietly. I will carry scars, I said softly. But I do not carry hatred. His hands clenched at his sides. I loved you once, he said. I know, I whispered. But love, I said, changes shape when trust is broken. He blinked and I could see him absorbing the truth. I spoke calmly, without accusation. I am choosing peace, I continued. Not passion. Not reconciliation. Peace. He stepped closer cautiously. I hear your words, I said. But I will not let them lead me back into the past. I see, he said. I wish I had understood sooner. You did not, I said. And that is why we are here now. He nodded, heavy with acceptance. I am sorry, he whispered again. I smiled faintly. I know. And I forgive you, not for us but for me. Tears gathered in my eyes, soft and quiet. I let them fall. I did not rush them. I did not hide them. I faced memory, each painful moment, without trembling. I explained it to him softly. These scars are mine to carry. They are not yours to erase. He swallowed, voice choked. I hear you, he said. I am at peace, I whispered. He looked at me, searching. I continued, closure does not require reunion. Understanding does not require return. Love does not always come back, it changes form. He remained silent, watching me, learning what years of silence and strength had built. I will live freely now, I said. I will not let pain define me anymore. I will let it teach me but never imprison me. He nodded, finally understanding. I felt the lightness in my chest. A weight I hadn't realized I carried began to lift. I said softly, "You do not get to see me broken again. That time is over." He exhaled slowly. I touched my ring, once heavy with memories, now light with clarity. "This is mine," I whispered. "My choice, my life, my story." He looked at me, no words left. I smiled faintly. "Thank you for your honesty," I said. "And now?" he asked, voice small. "Now," I said softly, "I continue forward." I stepped back, allowing space between us. The room felt different. The air light. I felt my heart open, not for him, not for past love, but for myself. Years of pain had forged this moment. I inhaled deeply. And for the first time in years I felt light. Not dependent on apology. Not bound by regret. Not tethered to him. I was free. Truly free. And that freedom carried me beyond silence, beyond betrayal, beyond the woman I had been. I whispered to the empty space around me, "I am whole." And in that moment I believed it. I stood at the edge of everything I had known. The past hovered like a shadow, familiar yet distant. He stood across from me, eyes full of longing, regret, and something I once craved, love. "I don't want to lose you again," he said softly. I studied him quietly. "Look at me," I whispered. He did. "I am not the woman you left behind," I said. He swallowed. "I see that." "You see it now," I said, "but you ignored it then." He flinched slightly. "I have lived years in silence," I continued, voice steady. "I have survived absence, betrayal, and neglect." He nodded slowly. "I learned," I said softly, "that survival is not enough. I needed more. I needed me." He lowered his gaze. "I am here," I said, "because I am ready to choose life, not the one I lost." "You're saying goodbye?" he asked, voice trembling. I nodded. "Without tears." I smiled faintly. "Yes, without tears. Because I am not grieving anymore. I am releasing. Not hating, not pleading, not longing. Just letting go." He looked at me, unsure whether to speak or retreat. "I thank you," I said softly, "for the lessons. For the pain. For the silence that made me stronger. For the absence that made me whole." He swallowed, lips pressed together. I never meant to." "I know," I interrupted gently. "Intent doesn't erase consequence. And I am not here to punish you. I am here to honor myself." He blinked, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "I can't ask you to understand," he whispered. "You don't need to," I replied. "I understand myself." I touched my wedding ring lightly. "I honor the woman I became through suffering," I said. "I refuse to abandon strength for comfort." He stepped closer, hesitant. "Please, just one chance. One more chance." I shook my head slowly. "One chance is not enough to undo years of silence, neglect, and betrayal," I said softly. His voice cracked. "I will do anything." I smiled faintly. "That's the point. I do not need anything from you. I have done everything for myself." He looked down, defeated but respectful. "I hope you are happy," he said quietly. "I am," I whispered. I turned toward the door, each step deliberate, each breath steady. He called my name, soft, almost pleading. I paused. "I wish," he began. I turned briefly, eyes calm but unwavering. "I wish only that you learn as I did," I said. "That strength is born in absence, and freedom comes from choosing yourself." I walked past him, through the hallway where memories lingered. I noticed every familiar corner, every picture, every echo of laughter and pain. I breathed in slowly. I whispered to myself, "I release this life. I release the past. I release him." The air felt lighter. Sunlight spilled through the windows. I smiled softly, feeling it touch my face. I walked into the open world beyond our history. I did not look back. Not once. I embraced freedom as my reward. I allowed destiny to lead me, trusting it beyond regret. I whispered, "I will write the next chapter. On my terms." Outside, life continued, unaware of the final choice I had made. But inside, everything had shifted. I was whole. I was strong. I was alive. The lessons of years, the scars I carried, the silence I endured, they had all led to this moment. I stepped into it fully. Each footfall a declaration of independence. Each heartbeat a reminder of survival turned victory. I walked past the room where we had shared our life. I touched the doorway lightly, not in sorrow, but in acknowledgement. "I honor you," I whispered. and I honor me. I turned into the sunlight spilling over the city streets. I felt wind on my face, freedom in my chest, and possibility in every step. No chains, no tears, no hesitation. Only me. I carried the woman I had become in silence. I carried strength forged from absence, dignity, and wisdom. I felt it rise inside me, powerful, untouchable. And I whispered one last time to the life I left behind, to the past that shaped me. Thank you. And goodbye. I walked forward. I was ready. For everything. I woke one morning feeling sunlight on my face, warm and unforced. No heaviness in my chest. No shadow of doubt lingering. I smiled freely. For the first time in years I could breathe fully. I whispered to myself, I begin again. I carried peace where wounds once lived. I touched the scar above my wrist, the one he had never seen, and I smiled softly. You belong to you now, I said. I walked through my apartment, noticing details I had ignored for years. The paintings, the books, the empty spaces, all mine. I whispered, everything here is mine. Everything here reflects me. I loved myself with patience and pride. I looked in the mirror, not for validation, but for acknowledgement. You are enough, I said aloud. I dressed in colors that made me feel alive. I laughed softly at a memory, but it no longer hurt. I welcomed a future without chains or shadows. The phone rang. A friend from years ago called. You sound different, she said. I smiled. I am different. I am free. She laughed lightly. I can hear it. I whispered, freedom has a sound. I honored survival as victory. Every tear, every sleepless night, every silent moment, it had shaped me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and raised it softly. To survival. To strength. I built joy through purpose and faith. I signed contracts for projects I had dreamed of quietly. I whispered, this is for me. I am worth it. I remembered pain without reliving it. The betrayal, the absence, the silence, they existed but they no longer defined me. I accepted love without dependence. Not from him. Not from anyone. Only from myself. I understood power lived in self-worth. Every decision I made now, every word I spoke carried the strength of my choice. I met a young woman at a seminar who asked, how do you stay so strong? I smiled faintly. Strength grows quietly. Pain teaches. Silence builds it. She nodded thoughtfully. I felt joy blossom in moments of purpose. I laughed with friends who never expected me to survive, much less thrive. I walked through streets with my head high, eyes open, chest lifted. He reached out one last time, a hesitant email, soft words. I see who you've become, he wrote. I read it carefully. I smiled faintly. I am who I became for myself, I whispered. I did not reply. I did not need to. The acknowledgement was enough for him, not for me. I placed my hand on the necklace I had kept for years, the symbol of past love. I whispered, thank you for teaching me, and goodbye. I stepped into sunlight, warm and certain. I ended my story not as a wife reclaimed. Not as someone waiting for apology or return. I ended it as a woman reborn. Strong. Whole. Free. I walked through the city, noticing life in every movement. Children laughed in the park. Birds flew across the sky. A breeze carried scents of coffee and flowers. I inhaled deeply. I whispered, this is mine. My life, my joy, my choices. I met eyes of strangers with warmth, not need. I smiled at a vendor on the street. You look happy, he said. I nodded. I am. Truly. I touched the scar again lightly with respect. I honor my past. I honor my strength. I honor myself. I walked into a new office space, my own projects awaiting me. The walls were empty, but soon they would hold visions, goals, and achievements that reflected only me. I whispered, this is creation, not repair. Even the quiet moments held victory. I poured tea into a delicate cup, sat by the window and watched sunlight move across the floor. I realized I could rest now, fully, without fear or shame. The city hummed around me. Life moved forward. And I moved with it. I laughed softly at a memory of the past, but the laughter was light, untethered. No regret. No longing. No need to reclaim. I carried joy in my chest. I carried wisdom in my mind. I carried love in my heart, not dependent but full. I whispered, I am complete. And for the first time in years I believed it. The woman I had been, the silent, hurt, forgotten version, was gone. In her place stood someone unstoppable. Someone patient, wise, and free. I walked out into the world with grace. Every step echoed choice. Every breath spoke power. Every smile radiated peace. I was no longer a chapter of someone else's story. I was the author of my own life. I whispered one last time to the past. Thank you. And now I live. And with that, I began again, whole, strong, and finally free.